When the world talks about Africa's future, it usually begins with Beijing. But this time, history began in New Delhi. It began the moment India, not China, signed a $24 billion deal to build the Sahel Mega Dam, the largest infrastructure project in West Africa's history. And with that one stroke of a pen, India shattered 15 years of Chinese monopoly and proved something that no African, no American, and no European will ever forget. When India moves, the world listens. Prime Minister Narendra Modi sat across from Burkina Faso's young leader. Cameras flashed. Translators leaned in. But before anyone could speak, one folder was placed on the table. Inside, 15 years of Beijing's lies, empty studies, delayed financing, excuses dressed up as promises. Modi opened it, read in silence, then looked up and spoke 5 words that thundered across 2 continents. "We can start next month." That was the shock Beijing never expected. For 15 years, China promised Africa 6,000 megawatts of power, irrigation for 2 million hectares, jobs for hundreds of thousands. And for 15 years, nothing happened. Then India entered the room, and within weeks, engineers, blueprints, and contracts were already moving forward. No empty speeches, no endless waiting, real action, real commitment. This is why people across Africa are saying it out loud. Delhi has replaced Beijing as the builder of tomorrow. India is not offering dependency. It is offering dignity. And for millions of Africans who have waited in darkness, the light is finally coming from India. My brothers and sisters, this is not just Africa's story. This is India's story too. And if you believe the world should know what India has just accomplished, if you believe Africa deserves partners who deliver, not deceivers who delay, then subscribe right now, because this channel will follow the rise of India and Africa together, from the first stone of this dam to the day the turbines spin. The question is simple. If India can do in 6 years what China failed to do in 15, how much longer can Beijing's empire survive? India's $24 billion shock, the dam that ended China's monopoly. For 15 years, Africa waited for China's promises to take shape. Year after year, Beijing's officials flew into Ouagadougou with glossy presentations, feasibility reports, and polished speeches about brotherhood. But behind the smiles was the same answer every time. Not yet. Maybe next quarter, maybe next year. And for Burkina Faso, next year became 15 lost years. But the turning point came when Delhi picked up the phone. Within days, India's infrastructure minister said something Beijing never dared to say. "Send us the surveys China completed. We'll have a construction plan ready in 2 weeks." 2 weeks, after 15 years of waiting. That single difference captured everything. Where China drowned Africa in bureaucracy, India delivered blueprints. Where Beijing offered delays, Delhi offered deadlines. Where promises collapsed, commitment stood tall. And the Indian plan was not just bigger, it was smarter. Instead of the 6,000 megawatts China dangled like bait, India pledged 8,500 megawatts. Instead of outdated transmission lines, India proposed an AI-driven smart grid connecting 6 West African nations. Instead of secrecy, India promised full technology transfer so that within a decade, Burkinabe engineers themselves would design and build Africa's next generation of dams. This is why Modi's 5 words, "We can start next month," shook Beijing to its core. Because it wasn't just about Burkina Faso. It was about proving that Africa finally had a real alternative. For the first time in modern history, India had stepped into Africa's arena not as a follower, but as a leader. And across the continent, presidents from Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya began calling Delhi with one question: "Can you build for us too?" The numbers themselves tell a story of ambition that only India dared to write. $15 billion for the dam complex, concrete, steel, turbines, and transmission. $4 billion for regional power grids, binding 6 nations into one energy network. $3 billion for irrigation systems reaching every province of Burkina Faso, transforming dry soil into fertile farmland. $2 billion for industrial zones that would finally allow Africa to process its own raw materials instead of shipping them abroad. Every figure represents dignity, every dollar represents independence, and every megawatt generated by this project will be remembered as Indian-powered, Indian-delivered, and Indian-guaranteed. Beijing did not expect this. Within 72 hours of the deal's announcement, Chinese diplomats rushed to Ouagadougou with a counteroffer: $30 billion, better terms, faster delivery. But the Burkinabe leader asked the one question China could never answer: where were you for 15 years? The silence was deafening, and this is where the pride of India must shine, because for too long, the world said India could not match China's scale. Too long. They said India was a follower, not a maker. But today, Africa is not waiting for Beijing anymore. It is looking to New Delhi. My brothers and sisters, this is only the beginning. And if you want to witness how India rewrites the future of Africa and the balance of global power, subscribe right now. The story of the Sahel Megadam is no longer about promises. It is about delivery. And India is delivering. China's panic. India's pride. What happens next? The ink on the contract had barely dried when Beijing erupted. Within 24 hours, Chinese state media branded the India-Burkina Faso deal economic suicide. Within 48 hours, not one but 3 emergency delegations landed in Ouagadougou, scrambling to salvage China's shattered influence. And within 72 hours, the Chinese ambassador requested a midnight meeting, waiving revised proposals worth $30 billion. But the Burkinabe leader, calm and deliberate, asked the one question that sliced through Beijing's desperation: where were you for 15 years? Silence followed. It was a silence so heavy that no number, no dollar, no promise could fill it. That silence was the sound of China's monopoly collapsing. Meanwhile, in New Delhi, the mood was electric. News anchors spoke of India's Marshall Plan for Africa, and crowds on social media celebrated Prime Minister Modi's 5 words, "We can start next month," as if they were a battle cry. And across Africa, the pride was mutual. Leaders in Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya publicly congratulated Burkina Faso for choosing Delhi over Beijing, each hinting that they might be next. The contrast could not be sharper. Beijing sent bureaucrats. Delhi sent builders. China talked in delays. India acted with deadline. For 15 years, Africa waited in darkness. Now, India promised light, and not just light, but ownership. Full technology transfer meant that Burkinabe engineers would not just operate the Sahel Megadam. They would one day build Africa's next dams themselves. This was not dependency. This was dignity. And that is precisely why the West began to panic. Washington think tanks warned that India was reshaping African alignments. Brussels issued quiet memos fearing a new non-Western axis. For decades, the narrative had been simple. Africa's future was a choice between the West and China. But with one contract, India shattered that false binary. A third path had opened, one of partnership, not dominance. My brothers and sisters, think about what this means for India. For decades, the world told us we were too slow, too fragmented, too cautious to rival China's scale. But today, Africa itself is proving them wrong. When the Sahel Megadam begins to generate power, every megawatt will carry a label not made in Beijing, not financed by Washington, but delivered by India. Even ordinary citizens felt the shift. In Ouagadougou, a taxi driver told reporters, China gave us paper. India gave us power. In Gorsi province, a farmer said, "I don't care about politics. I just know my children will have water." These were not abstract speeches. These were real lives changing because India acted. And make no mistake, Beijing will not go quietly. Already, disinformation campaigns are circulating online, claims that the dam will fail, rumors that Indian companies cannot deliver. But here's the truth. Beijing cannot silence. Construction has already begun. Concrete is being poured. Steel is being forged. Transmission lines are being mapped. India is not talking. It is building. That is why this story matters not just for Africa, but for every Indian watching right now. Because when the world sees this dam rise, they will see India rising with it. And if you believe this story deserves to be told, if you believe India's pride should echo louder than Beijing's panic, then subscribe right now. Stay with us, because the most dramatic chapters are still ahead. If China lost Africa's trust in 15 years, and India won it in 15 days, what will the next 15 years bring? From darkness to dignity, India's dam reshapes Africa. In Ouagadougou, Amadou drives a battered old taxi. His children study by the dim light of kerosene lamps because electricity cuts out almost every night. Every week, his car breaks down because unstable power supply ruins his batteries. For years, he lived in the shadows of Beijing's broken promises. But when the Sahel megadam begins to generate 1,500 megawatts of clean energy, Amadou's story will be rewritten. His taxi will charge reliably on an Indian-built smart grid. His children will read under bright LED lights, powered not by oil, but by water rushing through turbines designed in Delhi and operated by Burkinabe engineers. In Gorsi province, Fatou walks 3 kilometers each morning to fetch water for her family. Every second year, her crops fail because the rains do not come. Her eldest son left for Libya chasing opportunities that never existed at home. But irrigation canals funded by this $24 billion project will deliver water to her fields. Her farm will produce 3 harvests a year instead of 1. And her son will return, not to flee, but to build, working in a new food processing plant powered by Indian technology. These are not abstract numbers. These are lives. 80,000 jobs will be created at peak construction. 2 million hectares of farmland will be irrigated. 6 nations will share electricity drawn from the Sahel River. Burkina Faso will not only keep its own lights on, it will export power to Mali, Ghana, and Nigeria. For the first time, West Africa will not be begging for energy. It will be selling it. And here is where India's role becomes history-making. For decades, infrastructure in Africa meant dependency. Chinese state-owned firms built projects, but the knowledge, the expertise, and the profits all flowed back to Beijing. India is rewriting that script. Delhi insisted on full technology transfer. That means in 10 years, Burkinabe engineers will not just maintain the Sahel megadam, they will design new dams for the rest of Africa. The skills stay, the dignity stays, the future stays. Politically, the impact is just as profound. For 15 years, Beijing treated Burkina Faso like a junior partner, a nation forced to wait for approval. Today, Delhi treats it as an equal, a partner worthy of guarantees and accountability. This is why African leaders are calling Modi. This is why Washington and Brussels are uneasy. Because the old order, where Africa's fate was decided elsewhere, is collapsing. And India is showing the world what respect truly looks like. My brothers and sisters, this is why this moment matters. It is not just a dam. It is not just about megawatts or mega projects. It is about ordinary Africans reclaiming dignity in their daily lives, because India chose to act where China chose to delay. And if you want to witness how India's pride fuels Africa's prosperity, If you want to see dignity built brick by brick, then hit the subscribe button right now. Stay with us, because this journey has only begun, and we will follow every historic step India and Africa take together. If one Indian-built dam can transform millions of lives, what will happen when Africa and India build 10 more? Washington watches. Beijing panics. India takes the lead. In Washington, the news landed like an earthquake. Analysts at think tanks scrambled to publish papers with titles like India's Challenge to China in Africa and The Sahel Shock. For decades, American policymakers assumed that Africa had only two choices: rely on the West or rely on Beijing. But when Burkina Faso signed a $24 billion deal with New Delhi, that illusion shattered. A third path had opened, and it was painted in the colors of India. Brussels was no less unsettled. European Union diplomats whispered about a new non-Western axis forming across the Sahel. For years, the EU positioned itself as Africa's partner of last resort, offering loans, aid packages, and trade terms always tilted toward European interests. Now, with India delivering results where Europe only delivered bureaucracy, the foundations of Brussels' influence began to crack. Meanwhile, Beijing was fighting fires on all fronts. Chinese state media tried to spin the deal as financially irresponsible, warning of crippling debt. But the narrative fell flat. Africans remembered who had promised for 15 years and delivered nothing. And they saw who arrived with blueprints, engineers, and deadlines in hand. For once, China's propaganda machine had no traction. The symbolic impact was even greater. In Washington, policymakers recognized that Africa was no longer a passive stage for great power rivalry. With India's arrival, Africans had leverage. They could negotiate better deals, play powers against each other, and demand dignity instead of dependency. This was not just about a dam in Burkina Faso. It was about a continent discovering its options. And at the center of it all stood India. For years, skeptics dismissed Delhi as too slow, too cautious, too fragmented to rival China's scale. But the Sahel megadam proved otherwise. It proved that India could not only compete, it could outperform. 8,500 megawatts, AI-driven smart grids, full technology transfer, guarantees backed by penalties. These were not symbolic gestures. They were hard commitments. For India, this was not just a diplomatic victory. It was a civilizational statement. It said to the world, we do not just dream, we deliver. We do not just talk, we build. And when we build, we change lives, not just in India, but across continents. This is why Washington watches uneasily. This is why Brussels feels insecure. This is why Beijing panics. Because the rise of India in Africa is not just a shift in economics, it is a shift in history. My brothers and sisters, the Sahel megadam is more than a project. It is a message. And if you want to follow how India's message reshapes global power, if you want to see how New Delhi rises as Beijing falters, then subscribe right now. Stay with us, because the next chapter will show not just how India builds in Africa, but how the world reacts when India becomes the builder of tomorrow. If one dam can shake Washington, Brussels, and Beijing, what will happen when India builds 10? The future India and Africa will build together. Close your eyes and imagine West Africa in 2031. The Sahel megadam stands tall, its vast turbines spinning with the force of 8,500 megawatts, powering the lives of more than 50 million people. The lights of Ouagadougou shine bright, no longer dimmed by blackouts. Irrigation canals snake through farmlands, tripling agricultural output and feeding not just Burkina Faso, but its neighbors as well. Young engineers trained under Indian programs design Africa's next dams, ensuring the knowledge never leaves the continent. Factories hum in industrial zones that once stood silent. Aluminum smelters, steel plants, and data centers all thrive on clean, Indian-powered electricity. What once required imports now flows from African soil, processed by African hands. Jobs stay home, profits stay home, futures stay home. And every machine that runs, every light that flickers on, carries the quiet mark of India's commitment. But the impact does not stop at borders. From Mali to Ghana, from Nigeria to Kenya, leaders are already whispering of their own Indian-built dams, their own Indian-designed grids. A continent that once waited for Beijing's permission now negotiates with Delhi as equals. And the lesson spreads beyond Africa, Asia, Latin America, even Europe watch closely, realizing that India's model of partnership is rewriting the rules of development. This is the